All right, so let's take a look at these three problems. The directions say determine the value of c that will complete the square and then factor the expression. So um, to determine this c, what you want to do is to first make sure that the leading coefficient of this a is 1, and for each of these problems, the a is 1. So that's taken care of. Now, I want to take half of whatever b is and square it, and that's what c is going to be. Well, for this problem, b is 13. 13 is an odd number. I'm just going to leave this as an improper fraction, and 13 squared is 169, and 2 squared is 4. So there's my value for c. Now, if this trinomial were to equal x squared plus 13x plus 169 over 4, and I was asked to factor that, I could easily do it by knowing that this is a perfect square, that this is x plus half of 13 squared, and I'm done. Okay, so this is always, this 13 over 2 is always going to appear down here. Now, let's come over and take a look at this one. Now, let's put a 1 there to help us. Our formula is b over 2 squared. That's what I need this c to be. And this time the b is negative 1. So I'm going to take half of negative 1, square it, and that's going to be my value for c. Well, negative 1/2 times negative 1/2 is positive 1/4. So that means that if you gave me x squared minus x plus 1/4 and asked me to factor that, it would be absolutely no problem. I would just come in and say, well, x minus 1/2 quantity squared, because b over 2 is negative 1/2, because this was a 1, and I always take half of that. All right, so let's come over here. Again, that leading coefficient is a 1 in all three of these problems, so that makes it easy for me to come over and say, I need to take half of b and square it. Well, maybe it would be easier for us to think about, last time I showed you that this was a complex number. What if, instead of dividing by 2, I were to think of this as 1/2 times b? Or just simply write 1/2 times b. And then square that. Well, it's easy to multiply fractions together. I've got 1/2, and I'm going to multiply it times this 17 over 14. Okay, and I want to do this multiplication inside the parentheses here before I try and square it. 1 times 17 is 17, and 2 times 14 is 28. That fraction doesn't reduce. I'm going to square that. 17 squared is 289. Now, 28 squared, I don't know. I'm going to have to use my calculator. 28 squared. 784 is what I get. All right. So what that tells me, if I return back to this trinomial, if they had asked me, hey, I want you to factor x squared plus 17 over 14x plus 289 over 784, that looks pretty intimidating. I mean, it looks almost impossible. But if you recognize that it fits this pattern, that half of 17 over 14 is 17 over 28, and that 17 over 28 squared is that value for c, then this easily factors. It factors to x plus 17 over 28. That was the number before I squared it. And then that's squared. All right, so hey, I hope that helps. take enough time and effort to recognize and have faith in the technique and the formula of this b over 2 squared. Don't let the fact that b could be an odd number or could be a fraction, uh, frighten you and make you get a wrong value, a wrong answer. It's a number just like any other number. If b were, positive 8, and you took half of 8, which is 4, and you squared 4 and got 16, you're going to have to be able to take half of odd numbers. Well, I'm making that easy for you. Just leave it as an improper fraction and take half of fractions. Well, when you have a fraction, multiply it by 1/2. Just leave the numerator alone and multiply the denominator by 2 and then square it. So see, if once you look at it, once you practice, you'll find that it's not impossible. Talk to you later. Bye.